Oh boy, holographic meatloaf. Yum, 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 yum. That's this album to me. That's what I get here.
What colors the CN Towers? Doing that thing, you're doing that thing again. Something about you. Yeah, make the beat switch, turn the hoes up, give $1 million to him. Right now, better off waving a white flag. Boxing bro, he was clutching a side bag.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Full Spin Club. My name is David Stewart, and I'm the host of this online album listening club. And today is the first installment of something I'm calling Full Spun Day, which is where I talk about an album I listened to this week, and we do a short form version of the podcast where I talk to guests about their favorite albums. In this case, I'm just talking to you guys about an album I listened to this week. If you're a fan of the show already, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new to the show, welcome. I host a podcast on this exact same channel where I talk to comedians about their favorite albums. And so I would just like to get more into like albums that I'm listening to on the side, just because I keep up with music, I have opinions, and I would like to kind of have a conversation with you guys specifically about these albums as they come out, or as they've come out already, and I just would like to have a discourse with you, the audience. So instead of asking the guest questions, I'll be asking you directly. I'll be answering them myself, and hopefully this is a pretty short and succinct way to kind of hear about an album maybe you were thinking about, maybe you wanted to listen to, maybe you've already listened to, and you'd like to leave me a comment down below. That'd be super great. But, without further ado, let's get into it. Today we are talking about Drake's new album, Some Sexy Songs for You. In light of the Kendrick and Drake beef, I thought it would be a great opportunity to give this album a listen and see what the man is up to after being called a pedophile at the Super Bowl. So the structure of this show is going to be super similar to how I structure the podcast itself. So if you're new here, I'll explain that to you. But if you've already been here, you already know. There are three main segments to the show. That is On a Pedestal, which is where we talk about the highlights. There is Discourse, where we talk about the questions that I had while listening. Sometimes it's lowlights, other times it's just what is this? And then there is On a Turntable, which is where I pose questions to traditionally the guests that I'm talking to, but today I'll be posing them to you, the audience at large, as well as doing my best to answer them myself. So that being said, I start with liner notes, which is where I talk about the why. So why I chose this record, I already kind of talked about it. I was curious to see what Drake was up to after the beef. I think everyone was. We all wanted to know what the boy was going to get into, and so we decided, hey, let's all give it a listen. And frankly, I wasn't shocked, nor was I truly dismayed. So honestly, I'm pretty 50-50 on this one. It's like a mid-record, if I'm being honest. But the other reason I really wanted to listen to it was, I guess I wanted some exposure therapy. I'm not a Drake fan by any means. I listen to his music like everyone else, but I don't think he's the guy, as some of his stans truly insist he is. So as a critic of Drake, I felt it was necessary for me to, at the very least, give this new album a listen, especially in the post-beef era, and make sure that my arguments are solid. And I think some of them are still, but realistically, I was probably being a little harsh. So let's see what we got into here. Let's get into the first segment, On a Pedestal. I always start this segment by asking the guest, if you were recommending this album, what would you talk about in recommending? What would you hope someone pick up on? In my case, if I were recommending this album, I would say listen for the melodies. Drake has always had such, his strong suit has always been his singing and his melodic choices and kind of gliding over beats, as opposed to really being hard hitting with the pen. And while I'm sure there are some people that really resonate with his lyrics out there, I'm not necessarily one of them. It's more of a vibe than it is where I go into an album of his looking to learn about Drake the person, because I think we've all been sold Drake as at this point, he's been selling us a persona. So I never really listen to Drake that intentionally, but I do appreciate the vibes he creates. The other thing is if I were driving at night, I think this would be a good record to listen to. I know it's called Some Sexy Songs, and while there are obviously sort of sexual tones to the record, I get more of just a nighttime vibe. Slow grind in the club, potentially. There's I would say like how would I put this? Just like a certain darkness, and that's really it. And finally, I would just say that like the album itself sounds good, which like you would hope given like how much money he's able to put into like the production of these things. But the album does sound great. I will give him that. So I would say to a person who's like looking to listen to this record, I was like, hey, don't keep your expectations high as far as like content, but as far as like quality, you're absolutely allowed to have like high expectations because the quality is good. My top 3 songs, or probably not super traditional. Like I know there's a lot of like singles and whatnot off of this record, as there are with a lot of Drake albums. I'd say my top 3 are Mothballs, specifically the beat switch when it gets to Party Next Door. I think that's really great. And then Crying in Chanel is really good. That's probably a single, I would guess. I think like the I just wanna ball out. Like I think like that like vocal tone is really good. Again, like shout out to whoever's producing that. I'm sure 40 is in there somewhere. But I think that's really great. And then I think the closer Greedy is also great. Now, does it take forever to get to Greedy? Absolutely. It takes forever because this album is so long. But I have a feeling that like Greedy is what Drake, I think, would like to be. And I'll probably get into this a little more in my ramblings later, but realistically, I don't think Drake wants to be a rapper. I think he wanted the sort of like caricature of what a rapper is. But because of like internal misogyny, chose rapping instead of melodic singing, and that's probably why he hates The Weeknd so much. That opinion is actually honestly brought to you by comedian Alex Taylor here in Cincinnati also, because we were talking about this record, and I want to shout him out. He was an attorney in The People vs. Drake, which is a live show that'll be coming out on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. So, subscribe and see that when it happens. But shout out Alex for that opinion of being like, I think he just wants to be The Weeknd and is mad that he isn't. So, but I got a lot of a glimpse of that in Greedy. Let me know what you guys' top 3 are in the comments. I'd love to know. Let's get into discourse. One of my questions, like throughout my listen this time around, as well, like, and it's like kind of any Drake album, is why is this so fucking long? Why? I don't need it to be this long, man. I think if like I know that in the streaming era, it's really important to like put out as much as possible and hope something hits. But man, if he had like just an ounce of intention and really tried to make like a tight 10 songs, I think they'd be so great. I just feel like there's a lot of filler in this album, and like most of Drake's albums have that amount of filler. Like Scorpion was so long. So I think if I were to give Drake any advice at all, it'd be like, dude, just like tighten up, man. I think we'd be grateful for 10, there is like my second thing that I thought of a lot while listening to this that I kind of questioned was, I think I naively hoped there would be some introspection after the fact. This album is so quintessential Drake in the sense that it's all surface level and it's all just like meaningless. And I guess I was kind of hoping like after the beef that he would take an L and look inside himself and start giving us something that's like a little more true to the real Aubrey Drake Graham, which again is like a naive ask because he spent the better part of a decade, 15 years maybe, like putting on a mask and presenting this person to us. But like after being called out on that by Kendrick Lamar, I feel like, I guess I naively hoped that we would see a glimpse into like the real Drake who would like sit for a minute and accept the loss. But I think he's so deep in it that like that amount of like, I can't lose is too ingrained in him. And that kind of sucks. I wish it were more introspective because now would be the perfect time to pivot. Now would be the time. And like, I guess it would be giving up way too much power to Kendrick to be like, hey, you actually taught me a lesson during this. But I naively hoped that would happen. Maybe I've watched too many fantasy movies where like people learn a lesson at the end. And so I guess I'm disappointed in like my more cynical side was right. Like, he absolutely learned nothing from this, and that makes me sad. Along that same vein, and I'm probably going to title the video this, I feel like Drake fans at this point are Plankton when he eats holographic meatloaf in SpongeBob. That feels like like kind of a niche reference, but like when he's like, "Oh boy, holographic meatloaf, yum 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 yum." That's this album to me. That's what I get here, and that sucks. I just want him to be more real. I want that out of all of my art, and that brings me to the art versus entertainment debate that I talk about on the show all the time. I don't think Drake is an artist. I think he's an entertainer, and I'm consistently let down when he doesn't dive more into the art side of things. I've been watching Succession recently, and that part where Kendall is like, "What are words? They're just complicated airflow." I figure that is exactly what Drake is. Like, he's like, "What are words? They're meaningless. They're just fun to listen to. It's fun to like pump out of a speaker and hit you in the face. But none of it means anything." And I just so desperately want Drake to mean what he says, because I think it's like a waste of potential. Unless he's scared there's nothing in there, in which case I feel very bad for him. I think the last thing that second to last thing I picked up on was the skits are unrealistic, as they usually are, because I don't think he actually interacts with people in the way that the skits imply he does. Specifically, I'm thinking of the skit before Nokia, where it's like a girl talking about like, "You're like, girl, you were not on a break." Like every time I hear anyone speaking realistically like around Drake, it is unbelievable to me, because I know he doesn't surround himself with realistic people. And again, that could all be conjecture. So feel free to leave a comment and be like, "No, Drake is actually real as hell." And finally, the last portion of discourse that I wanted to bring up was, I feel like Party Next Door did most of the heavy lifting on this record. Every time there was I already mentioned it in the Pedestal, but like when there was a beat switch in Mothballs and then Party Next Door came in, that's what made that song rock. That's what made that song, like, for example, like Drake had his own beat switch in Gimme a Hug, and that was completely wasted, because the beginning of Gimme a Hug, pretty great. And then like the beat switch happens, and then he switches into that line where he's like, "Fuck a rap beef, I'm just trying to get the party lit for the bitches." I was like, this sucks. This truly is just so lame, just weak bars. So that's what makes me think that like Party Next Door is doing most of the heavy lifting in this record. Leave a comment, let me know. And that brings us to our final segment here on a turntable, where I kind of pose some questions to you and maybe answer them myself in the process. So I guess, do you, the Drake fans, if any of you are watching, if you're haters, feel free to comment as well, but like, do you, the fans, also wish Drake would be more real and like take the mask off more? I wonder if I'm alone in that. I made a lot of comments about that in the last segment, where I was like, "Hey man, what if you were just real for a second? You have the platform. Would you guys feel proud of Drake like I would if he did that? Or am I just like wishing for something that should never happen, and we just like shut up and make some beats, to quote him talking about Metro Boomin? Like, do you just want Drake to shut up and sing?" I think since he has the platform, he might as well should be real with people. I think vulnerability is such an important part of art. And like the fact that he shows almost none is it's off-putting to me, and I think subconsciously off-putting to a lot of people. But again, tell me I'm wrong. So my second question to pose to you guys are, if you were to take anything from this album and learn from it, what would it be? I think my answer is, again, being concise. And honestly, this episode is a representation of that answer, because I'm trying to make this under 15 minutes. The long form podcast is great on its own, but I recognize not everyone has the attention span for that. If the podcast is my 22 song full length album, awesome. But like, this is more of like an EP. So I'm trying to, say less in less time. The other thing I would want to take is like continue to try and be vulnerable. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, or if there are people out there that are like, "No, be less vulnerable." I don't know who would do that, but I think those are the two things I would take from this album. That and have like a just super good friend like Party Next Door, because imagine being anyone else and like seeing your friend go through what Drake went through and was like, yeah, man, I'll make a record with you. That's insane to me. So get yourself a Party Next Door, unless he's being held hostage, which he could be. And then my final question for this episode is, what do we think Drake's legacy is going to be moving forward? As I listen to this record, this man's pretty deep into his career at this point. He's gone through a lot, super publicly got called a pedophile. That's really tough. But he's still making what I would consider hotel art music. So I'm just wondering, what do we think Drake's legacy is? Do we think it's going to be anything valuable moving forward? Do we think he's making an impact on the culture, or is it just chart numbers? Like, I honestly, I can't imagine a world where we're really talking about Drake like as an impactful person in the scene as much as like Kendrick is, because of those layers of art that we're talking about. Like, Kendrick has won a Pulitzer Prize. I imagine that there's not a lot Drake can do besides like boast his numbers. And I think like in the long term, like the long term, those numbers aren't going to mean as much as like the cultural shifts that really good artwork can cause. So I'm curious, leave a comment below what you think Drake's legacy is going to be. Because I genuinely don't know. But all right, gang, that wraps it up for this. Thanks for tuning into Full Spun Day. Next week, we're doing another album, so tune in. If you liked this, please subscribe, please comment, please like the video. I'd love to see more views on the full-length podcast. I talk to such creative people about music, and it's super fun. So if you like listening to full albums and talking about them, come on, join the club. I'd love to have you. Thanks so much. I'll catch you next time. Peace.